Rome's emperor is dead, murdered in his own palace by the very men sworn to protect him. Now, standing over his body, the Praetorian Guard makes a decision that will shatter every assumption about power in the ancient world. They are not looking for a successor. They are looking for a buyer. Within hours, the throne of the Roman Empire, the seat that commands legions, controls provinces, and rules millions, will be dragged into the open and sold like livestock at market. Two of Rome's wealthiest men will stand outside the Praetorian camp, shouting bids into the night. Each offer raises the price of absolute power. The question is not who deserves to rule, it is who can afford it. And when the auction ends, the man who wins will learn that buying an empire and keeping it are two very different things. The emperor was dead, and Rome held its breath. On the last day of 192 AD, Commodus lay murdered in his bath, strangled by a wrestler after 12 years of madness and excess. The Senate erupted in celebration. They tore down his statues and cursed his memory. But beneath the relief, a darker question surfaced. Who would rule now? The Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite soldiers tasked with protecting the emperor, moved quickly. Within hours, they installed Publius Helvius Pertinax, a respected senator and former general. He was 66, disciplined, and everything Commodus was not. The Senate approved. The people hoped. For a brief moment, it seemed Rome might return to order. But Pertinax inherited an empire on the edge of collapse. Commodus had emptied the treasury with his games, his palaces, and his delusions of being Hercules reborn. The finances were ruined, the legions were restless, and the Praetorian Guard, the very men who had placed Pertinax on the throne, expected to be rewarded for their loyalty. Pertinax refused. He cut their bonuses. He sold off Commodus's lavish possessions. He demanded discipline and austerity, a return to the old Roman virtues. The Senate admired him. The Guard despised him. They had grown used to emperors who paid for their support, who understood that power in Rome no longer came from the Senate or the people. It came from whoever could afford the soldiers' loyalty. Tension thickened in the palace. The Praetorians watched their new emperor with cold eyes. Pertinax had restored Rome's dignity, but he had forgotten the most dangerous lesson of imperial politics. In this new Rome, virtue was worthless without gold, and the men with swords were growing impatient. The gates of the Praetorian camp slammed shut. Inside, the body of Pertinax was still warm. Outside, Rome held its breath. What had just happened was not simply murder. It was erasure. An emperor, dead in his own palace, killed by the men sworn to protect him. The Guard had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. There would be consequences, unless they moved first. Someone among them understood it immediately. The Guard needed leverage. They needed insurance. And in Rome, insurance came in the form of power. Specifically, the power to name the next emperor. If they controlled the throne, they controlled their own survival. The question was no longer whether they would choose a successor. The question was how much that successor would pay. Word began to spread through the city, whispers at first, then louder. The Praetorians were not mourning. They were not panicking. They were waiting. Behind those locked gates, they had turned the imperial office into a marketplace. The throne of Rome, won by Augustus, held by Marcus Aurelius, and stained with the blood of Caligula and Nero, was now a commodity. The auction had begun. Didius Julianus heard the news in his villa. He was not a soldier. He was not a general loved by legions, or a senator with a web of loyal clients. He was something else entirely, a man of wealth, connections, and timing. Julianus had spent decades navigating the inner circles of Roman power. He had served as governor, as consul, and as a fixture of the aristocracy. He knew how the system worked. He knew that in Rome, everything had a price, even loyalty, and especially loyalty. When his son-in-law arrived with the rumor, Julianus did not dismiss it. He did not laugh. He listened. The Praetorians were offering the empire, not to the Senate, not to the legions, to whoever could pay. It was grotesque. It was unprecedented. It was an opportunity. Julianus was not a fool. He understood what this moment meant. The guard had murdered an emperor and now stood exposed, vulnerable to the wrath of the Senate, the people, and the armies stationed across the empire. They needed a figurehead, someone with enough status to legitimize their actions, enough wealth to reward their risk, and enough desperation to accept the throne on these terms. Julianus fit the profile. More importantly, he had the money. But this was not a simple transaction. Julianus was not buying a title. He was buying time. He was buying the illusion of control in a city that had just watched its emperor die like a common victim. He was betting that gold could replace legitimacy, that coins could quiet the rage rising in the streets and the camps beyond the city walls. His wife protested. His advisors hesitated. But Julianus had already decided. He left his villa and made his way toward the Praetorian camp. He was not the only one. Other wealthy men had heard the same rumor. Other senators and insiders, men who understood that chaos creates openings. The gates were still closed, but the bidding was already taking shape. Inside the camp, the Praetorians waited. They had no script for this and no precedent, but they had weapons and desperation, and they had realized something that would reshape the empire. Power was not earned anymore. It was sold. Rome, for all its marble and history, had become the highest stakes auction in the world. Julianus approached the walls. He did not come as a conqueror. He came as a customer. The question was not whether he wanted the throne. The question was whether he could afford it, and whether the price would be paid in gold, or in something far more costly.
Most people stop at the surface of history, but you're still here. So if you want the parts they don't teach, the truths buried beneath time, consider subscribing and becoming part of those who chose to see it all. Now, let's continue.
The auction begins at dawn. Two men stand below the walls of the Praetorian camp, shouting numbers up to soldiers leaning over the ramparts. Didius Julianus on one side, Sulpicianus, the city prefect and father-in-law of the murdered emperor, on the other. Between them stands the throne of Rome. The bidding climbs in thousands, 5,000 sestertii per soldier. Then 6. Sulpicianus raises to 7,000, convinced his position gives him the advantage. The Praetorians shout down for more. Julianus counters with 8,000. The guards cheer. Sulpicianus goes higher. The crowd in the streets grows larger, silent and horrified. Julianus makes his final offer. 25,000 sestertii for every guardsman. The sum is staggering, more than 5 years of salary for each soldier. The Praetorians roar their approval. The gates open. Julianus is escorted inside, led to the imperial standards, and proclaimed emperor by men whose hands still carry the blood of Pertinax. He is taken to the Senate. The senators sit in their chamber, trapped. Outside, the Praetorian Guard waits. There is no vote in any real sense, and no debate. The motion is presented. Ratify Didius Julianus as emperor. One by one, they raise their hands. The transaction is complete. Rome has been sold. But the moment Julianus leaves the Senate, the illusion starts to break. The people in the streets do not cheer. They stand in clusters, whispering and staring. Some shout insults. Others turn away in disgust. Julianus enters the palace and finds it nearly empty. Servants have fled. Officials refuse to attend him. He sits on the throne, but the room feels hollow. Then the reports arrive. The legions are moving. In Britain, Clodius Albinus declares himself emperor. In Syria, Pescennius Niger does the same. In Pannonia, Septimius Severus, commander of the most powerful frontier army, refuses to recognize a man who bought the purple. He begins marching toward Rome with 16 legions. Julianus sends messengers offering money. The legions ignore them. He orders the Praetorian Guard to prepare for war. They hesitate. He tries to buy loyalty again, with more gold and more promises. But the soldiers now understand what the Senate, the people, and the distant armies already know. An emperor without legitimacy is not an emperor. He is a man holding a title that no longer means anything. Julianus realizes, too late, that he has not won an auction. He has purchased his own execution. The Praetorians who sold him the throne are the same men who will decide when to take it back. Rome does not belong to the highest bidder. It belongs to whoever the legions choose to follow, and they have already chosen someone else.
The news reached the provinces like a shockwave. In Pannonia, Septimius Severus commanded 3 legions hardened by frontier wars. In Syria, Pescennius Niger controlled the wealthy eastern provinces and their armies. In Britain, Clodius Albinus held the island's garrison. Each man heard the same story. The throne had been sold. The emperor was not chosen by merit, not elevated by the Senate, and not even seized by force. He had simply paid more. Each commander understood what that meant. Severus moved first. He declared Julianus an illegitimate usurper and began marching his legions toward Rome. Niger followed, rallying support in the east. Albinus positioned himself carefully, waiting to see which way the balance would tip. The empire fractured along military lines. The auction had not settled the question of power. It had ignited a civil war. In Rome, Julianus watched his support collapse in real time. The Praetorian Guard, the force he had purchased for 25,000 sesterces per man, grew restless. They had been paid, yes, but Severus was coming with real soldiers, men who had fought actual battles, not ceremonial parades. The Praetorians began to understand that their gold would mean nothing if Severus reached the city. Loyalty bought with coins dissolved the moment a sharper blade appeared on the horizon. The Senate, which had confirmed Julianus with nervous applause, now turned cold. Senators who had smiled and bowed began avoiding him. Whispers spread through the Curia. Some quietly sent messages to Severus, pledging support and distancing themselves from the auctioned emperor. Julianus had no allies, only people who had briefly accepted his money. He tried to fight back. He sent envoys to negotiate. He offered Severus a share of power, a co-emperorship, anything to stop the march. Severus ignored him. Julianus attempted to rally the Praetorians for a defense of the city. They refused. He even considered fleeing, but there was nowhere to go. The man who had bought an empire had nothing left to spend. On June 1st, 193 AD, just 66 days after the auction, the Senate met in emergency session. They declared Julianus an enemy of Rome. They formally recognized Septimius Severus as emperor. They condemned Didius Julianus to death. The same body that had validated his rule now erased it with a single vote. No trial, no defense, just a bureaucratic correction, as if the auction had been a clerical error. The Praetorian Guard carried out the sentence. A soldier entered the palace and found Julianus alone, abandoned by his attendants, his advisors, and his purchase protectors. Ancient sources say he begged. He offered more money. He pleaded for exile instead of execution. The soldier did not respond. The blade came down in a private chamber, far from the crowds, far from the Senate, and far from the auction block where it had all begun. His body was handed over to his wife and daughter. There was no state funeral and no honors. The man who had paid the highest price in Roman history was buried quietly. His name was already becoming a warning rather than a legacy. Severus entered Rome weeks later, not as a purchaser, but as a conqueror. He disbanded the Praetorian Guard entirely, executing the officers who had run the auction and replacing the ranks with his own loyal soldiers. The message was clear. The throne could not be bought. It could only be taken. In the end,
The auction answered its own question in the worst possible way. The Empire's price was not gold, it was the loyalty of soldiers, and that loyalty could always be outbid, not with coins, but with swords.